Okay, thanks everybody for joining us for our very first Focus on a Healthy Heart from Heart of Junction. I'm Darren, I'm the pastor there. This is Zach, he's the associate pastor. And we want to talk today about one of our uh, biggest priorities just at the church, one of the things that we think about the most, and we talk about it a lot. We've got signs all over the church. If I ask anybody at the church about what love is, they always will tell us what love is. And so we want to kind of break it down and talk about it a little bit. And so because love is important to the church, and I have opportunities all the time to counsel with people. In fact, I was just thinking today about how many people I actually meet first time because something's going on in their life and they're looking for some help in a relationship or marriage or something like that. And we end up talking about love. I talk about this topic a lot, and so we're gonna break down love today. What is love? And first thing that I think about a lot of times, I'll ask people, "What's the opposite of love?" And most people, when they answer the question, "What's the opposite of love?" they almost always will tell me that love is meeting needs, or they won't tell me that at all. They'll tell me that love, the opposite of love, is hate. And so when we think about the opposite of love being hate, that just feels like the most normal thing that anybody could actually say. Well, the thing that they'd want to say quicker than anything else. But hate's not actually the opposite of love. Hate's the opposite of likes a lot. When you say that you love something and then you might hate it later on or hate something else, a lot of times what people are telling me is, well, like, I love chocolate cake. I just absolutely love chocolate cake. But they don't mean that they love chocolate cake. They don't mean that they care deeply for the well-being of chocolate cake. They mean that they like it a lot. And then they will tell me that they hate chocolate cake. And it's just not the opposite of love. Hate is the opposite of likes a lot. The opposite of love is not hate, but it's apathy. It's not caring. And that's where we start to get into a lot of trouble, I think. So when we start to break down what love is then and talk about a good definition of love, we want to be thinking about the things that it is and not the things that it's not. So we want to define the terms, I think, is what I usually tell people. One of the things that I might say to people a lot of times is that I have a car that I want to sell you, and it's $1,000. And if you are thinking, well, I saw the car he drove up in, it's worth more than $1,000, I'm going to give him that. But what if I'm thinking about a toy car that's worth $3? You don't want to give me $1,000 for that. And so we need to define the terms. What are we talking about when we say love? Because I'll ask people, are you in love with her? Are you in love with him? And they'll say, yeah. They'll say, I don't think so. Sometimes they tell me, I used to be, but I fell out of love. And so I'm just like, well, what is love then? And so it's not just likes a lot, because that's where we get so much in relationships. You've been married for you've gotten past the 7-year period,
yes.
right?
Yes,
And
yes.
you probably know very well that a lot of what was going on in your dating life before you were married that you would have called love and it was a good thing is probably not there a lot anymore. And
It's definitely not the same as it was, 11, 12 years ago.
it changes. Gary Thomas says that dating doesn't prepare us for marriage; it prepares us for vacation. But we still like that part of what love is, and then we think that we just don't love a person anymore. When in reality, it's just, the truth is that we probably don't like a lot of what's going on, and to a degree, it's probably because we've literally consumed a lot of what that person was about. We've worn them down. Everything that was beautiful at the beginning, we just don't see anymore, and so we start to lose that. So I think the thing that's important for us to recognize is love's not a lot of things. It's not a feeling. It's not the warmth that you get. It's not anything like that. It's not an adjective. It's not a word that describes anything. It's not consuming. Love's a choice. Love is always going to be a choice, and so we want to We want to recognize that. So when we're defining what it is, we need to pay attention to a couple of things. And I think one of those things is that if love is a choice, then it's something that we do. It's a verb. Love is a verb. It's something that you do rather than you feel. And so to define the term, it's a really boring definition, but it's so good that we have signs made out of wood that we can't change at our church that say what love is. And if I ask our church on a Sunday morning, if I said, what is love? The whole church at once would say, love is meeting needs. We all know that. That's what we talk about at the church all the time. And so what's the deal with needs then? Everybody has legitimate needs. And so I think we all have the need to feel legitimately, we have the need to feel accepted. And you can think about what happens when people don't feel accepted. You know what divorce is about and things like that. It basically means that you can do something that will make me not want to be with you anymore. But we have the need to feel accepted. And I'm going to argue in a minute that it's a legitimate need. We have the need to feel significant or important. And I think we also have the need to feel secure, or sometimes we'll say safe. And I always make a point of saying, if you want to remember these, you can write notes, but you will also notice that it makes a nice little acrostic there that
it does.
It just says ASS. That's what it says, Zach. So
I think you're probably going to get toward the garden here in a little bit. But one of the places in the Bible that this really comes out, that's really popular that everybody knows, is the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? And so you have someone who's been out in the country, he gets attacked, gets robbed, gets beaten up, he's laying in the gutter, and Jesus is telling this story in response to the question, who's my neighbor?
right.
Like you say, I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself. Well, who's my neighbor? And so he's telling the story in the context of who loved this person, and the priest walks by, and the Levite walks by, and then the Samaritan. It doesn't say that the priest or the Levite hated the man who was beaten and laying in the gutter, but they were apathetic toward him.
Right, and that's
they
the deal.
moved on, and the guy who Jesus said loved him is the guy who accepted what was happening, accepted the guy for what he was. Maybe the priest wasn't supposed to touch him because he thought he might be dead. Like he couldn't be ritualistically unclean. Like that was going to be a problem. He was significant because he stopped to help him.
Just go back to the acceptance part too, though, is the Samaritan was he was called a Samaritan because he's not the one. He's naturally not accepting of the man in the gutter.
He's a lower class citizen.
But he treated him as a human anyway, even when he wouldn't have expected it. So the acceptance part was there for real.
Right. And then, of course, the security when he takes him to the inn and he pays to get him healed up. And Jesus gives us a story where he puts the context of hate versus apathy, I think, into really good light.
Right. And then, so in our real lives, though, we've got this going all the time as well. We know what it feels like to not be accepted. We know what it feels like to not be secure. Like in our lives, we can even have financial difficulties, and all of a sudden it becomes a relationship difficulty because our finances are so insecure that we fight and can pick at each other. But it begins with the fact that we're feeling insecure financially, or to feel insignificant. Talking recently to a woman who. She's like, I love my kids, but my husband loves my kids more than he loves me. And she was feeling less than her kids. And it's not that she wants her kids to be diminished, but she just legitimately felt diminished. I know sometimes it can be a case of, I feel like I'm the maid around here and not really appreciated for who I am. I'm the only one that pays attention to these things. So we all struggle with these things. And I think it's important for us to recognize, I say these are legitimate needs because God made us this way. This is just the way that we are. And so we need to recognize that these needs are legitimate. And I do want to go to the idea that in the beginning, we really had this together. In the beginning, in the garden, we were perfectly accepted. You think about, Adam and Eve and acceptance. There was literally nothing they could do to get into trouble. God said, there's a tree, don't eat that fruit. And you can do anything else. Just don't do that one thing. Mm-hmm. You can call each other names. You can curse. You could take the Lord's name in vain. You can do anything you want, and nothing's going to get you in trouble with me. I will not do anything. Just don't do that. Don't do that one thing. And I think it's important to recognize that Adam and Eve were completely accepted. They felt completely comfortable with God that way, and they were also significant. But there were only two of them. When we sit around and we pray today, and sometimes we think, man, I know there's other people praying right now. How can God pay attention to all of these?
It's like prayers? That Bruce Almighty thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you don't lose control of it though, because there was only two then, and I know God's big and He can hear us all pray, but you definitely feel significant when you're the only two. Mm-hmm. And then they were secure. I always like to think about the fact that, one of in the garden there was just no danger, and they were naming animals. They were observing everything, and I was like, what is that thing? It's fluffy and has really sharp teeth. I think I like it. Let's call it a tiger. And they just had all of this, and it was right there for them. But then they messed up. And they goofed it up. They were no longer accepted. They were kicked out. When they ate of that fruit, God came to him, and he's there's something going on here, and he says, you have made such a terrible mistake. The one mistake you couldn't make, you've made, and I can no longer accept you. I have to kick you out. Mm-hmm. And they were barred from the Garden of Eden. Angels with fiery swords in the way. They are out. They're no longer significant, but now they're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 165 billion people have ever been alive. And it reminds me of that Calvin and Hobbes when he looks up at the universe and he's like, I am just a speck, and he figures it out, and that's how we feel a lot of times. And then we're not secure anymore either. So he says that you have to work for a living. He says you're going to feel the pain of childbirth to keep yourselves going here. You're eventually going to die. You're going to die, and we just lose all of our security. And so this creates a great problem. So again, we're thinking about love here, and we're thinking about what it is. And I think it's probably worth mentioning as well that the whole concept of love and God really has a lot to do with the garden itself as well. Just from the perspective of He put that tree out there, and there's a part of us when we're hearing the first part of this story that we had it and we goofed it up. Why did God make it that way? But the fact of the matter is that if He didn't give them a choice, if they couldn't choose against Him, then really they can't choose for Him. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of what love is about too, because like I said before, it's a choice, right? And so we're still tapped to this idea that love is meeting needs. And what we're saying so far is we all have these legitimate needs, but we goofed them up. And now we're kind of lost when we think about the idea of being disconnected from God. We can put in the context of almost any relationship that we ever get into. And we get to this place where I think we need to take a time out and look a little bit at what sin is, because that becomes really important in the concept of love, and especially in the concept of broken relationships and healthy relationships. As healthy relationships, we're kind of loving people the way we're supposed to and the way God's ordained. And in unhealthy relationships, something is going on with these needs that causes us trouble. And so one of the things that, when we think about sin, sin's often described as missing the mark or acting against the will of God. and and I kind of, you always hear that in church and their sermons, and they're like,
Yeah, the target and the arrow.
yeah, and you're messing it up, and what can you do there? And so we kind of put it in this context: sin is a wrong attempt to meet a legitimate need. These needs are legitimate, and when you think about, you can think about any relationship that you've ever been involved in. In fact, I'm gonna put you on the spot. I'm not giving you a list of questions,
Ready.
but can you sort of look in your own life and think about times when you have done wrong things in order to meet one of these legitimate needs in your life?
Yes.
Do
Do you want me to say one?
Can you share one, or is it because these things get you in trouble, and so?
Well, I mean, yeah, they get you in trouble, but so Owen just had his parent-teacher conferences.
Yeah.
And so it's one of these situations where
And Owen's 5, right?
Owen's 7.
7.
Just turned 7.
He was 5 2 years ago.
He was 5 2 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. But he's super smart, but he's kind of lazy, which is a little bit of a problem.
He's my kind of a guy.
And I can see where he's doing some of this stuff, but we were at this parent-teacher conference, and I wanted to look like super smart, right, to the teacher. I'd only met her once. It's like the first parent-teacher conference. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go do this, and I think I did look kind of smart for most of it. But we were talking about how she always has to pay attention to him, because when they're doing a subject, if she doesn't check up on him, then he's going to try to get away without doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, yeah, he's so smart. If he would just use his powers for good instead of evil. And I was trying to be funny. And
yeah.
And she goes, well, there's nothing evil about him. He just doesn't get it yet. Like, he's 6.
So
at the time he was 6. But
so your attempt to
my attempt to sort of
feel significant,
be smart and significant, yeah, I totally get it. I know what you're up against. I just
you put your own child's
I called out my son's moral
works
standing
for the devil almost, right?
Because he's evil. And it's that's it's a really easy example, and it's funny, and I won't get in trouble with Owen, which is basically why I said that story. But it just happens so fast.
And it happens all the time.
That's the deal. It happens all the time.
So when you think about acceptance, security, and significance, and how we do these wrong things in order to meet the legitimate need, I can think, we work with college kids and young people, and a lot of the kids we work with are really sharp, and they're part of our ministry. But I get into counseling situations with people all the time, and you will meet a kid who is maybe trying to deal with the mental after effects of going through an abortion or something like that. And as you talk to her, you're like, so why did you get into this situation with this guy, and what he's gone now and everything like that? And and I can't tell you how many times girls have told me that a lot of what they're doing there is trying to lock in a relationship, because they're afraid they're going to lose a boyfriend. Christian girls are sleeping with guys because they're afraid they're going to lose their boyfriend. And that's security. Mm-hmm. And it's really easy for us to just go, oh man, that's a sin. Sex before marriage is a sin, and it is biblically. It's defined as that. But I really think that God wants us to understand that this is way more than just breaking a rule. You're a person who has struggling to feel significant or maybe accepted by somebody, and so you're going to do something that is not a good idea, but you're going to do it anyway because that need needs to be met, and you just don't know how to do it correctly. And so you see it in marriages where a husband, for instance, is feeling insecure because of his work, and instead of telling his wife, this is what's going on with the job, I feel like I'm about ready to lose it or something like that. Instead of doing that, he's like, I'm feeling beat down at work, and so I'm going to yell at my wife so I'm powerful and big. And then all of a sudden he's like, well, he's significant, but he's also frightening now. And and so all of this stuff is what comes from it's important to talk about what sin is at this point, because these wrong attempts to meet legitimate needs get us into trouble all the time. It breaks relationships with people, and that's the next part. Brokenness in relationships, brokenness in mental and spiritual and physical health. I mean, you can see it in all of the different cases. I will tend to meet my security needs by eating burritos, or donuts, and I talk about this all the time, but it's I talk about it because it's true, and I know it's true, and so what'll happen for me is I literally can have I have a brokenness in my health. I think it's a spiritual thing, and it'll come from, well, I've got 9 appointments, and 4 of the people that I'm meeting with are super sad, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get them to not be sad today. Or I've already had the meetings and I didn't help them to be better. Sure. I know I've been dealing lately with a lady that has Alzheimer's, and my deal is to talk with people and make them feel better, and I can't do that for her anymore. And I was going through these periods where I'd go see her, and every time I would see her, I was like, I only stayed and visited with her for 25 minutes. And then the next time it's like, I only stayed for 20 minutes. And I got cleared down to where I'm only there for 5 minutes because I don't have anything I can do for her anymore. And I would leave there feeling insecure because the thing I do to help people I can't do. And I swear, I'm twice as hungry. And if I eat a burrito or if I eat something I don't need, it's like gives me control again and I feel secure. And so we do this all the time. It's the basis for most of the counseling that we go to, not church counseling, just secular counselors. We are doing wrong things to meet legitimate needs in our life, and it breaks us down in spiritual, emotional, and physical levels, and just can destroy relationships. But I think that a healthy understanding of love can restore a whole lot of brokenness. If we understood that love is meeting needs, if we really understood that, we can recover a lot of lost ground in our lives. And so I think the thing we need to know then is that even though these are legitimate needs, and even though our natural condition has been that those things have been broken, we also, through Jesus, get these things back. He's made a way to restore all of this. Where we were once struggling to connect with people, to feel accepted, he accepts us. I think one of my favorite verses for that says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And I mean, that's the exact opposite of the way the world is. The more things we do wrong and harmful to another person, the closer and closer we get to that line where they just will not accept us anymore. Yeah. In fact, we've probably done this to people. A lot of people listening to this have probably gotten to the point where they're just like, no more. I'm not going to do that person anymore. And Jesus is like, well, you were at your very worst. I still love you. I went to the cross for you. Remember that scene in the Passion when he's on the cross and he's like, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's the depth of that's the ultimate acceptance statement. Where we feel small or unimportant, he assures us that we're significant even in the eyes of the Creator. And I think that's a big thing for us to get a hold of, that Jesus gives that idea of significance back. I always like to think about with this, just the really basic idea from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus tells us, you are the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. I remember when, way back when I was first learning about this and thinking about this, Bill Clinton was president, and it was nothing against Bill Clinton. It's just a story. But there was a big deal because he flew into Los Angeles and he landed on the runway, and it took him like 20 extra minutes to come off the plane. And nothing happens when a president's on a plane in an airport. Nobody lands or takes off. And their traffic, air traffic was stopped for an extra 20 minutes because he was getting a haircut on that airplane, and they were wrapping it up, and he he got his haircut done. And I'm sure if he would have known, he would have just said, let's go finish it at the hotel or whatever. But that's important, right? That's an important guy. It's a significant guy that can stop air traffic in Los Angeles to get his hair cut. And then we've got this deal, though, where Jesus is like telling the whole world that I'm the light of the world, or the salt of the earth. And that's a bigger thing. It is. And we just don't get that. And then he gives it back to us with the area of security, where we feel like we're drifting or we're hopeless. He assures us that we're secure in him. And he tells us, for instance, that once you're in my hand, I will not lose you. I've not lost one that I've held within my hand. And so he gives it all back. And so that's sort of the trip through this that gets us kind of to our kicking off point. But Zach, do you have any thoughts about that at that point?
Well, I agree with all of those things. I think about being accepted. I really like the deal about how when we were at our worst, right, when we were still sinners, he died for us. There's something about the understanding that regardless of how badly I've messed things up, it's never so much that his blood is unable to take care of it. Like, that's acceptance. Mm-hmm. It's impossible for you to do something too bad to mess it up. And so I like that a lot. The significance thing, Psalm 139, right? Mm-hmm. There's 165 billion people who've been alive, but he knows what's in my heart better than I do.
My days are numbered, and knows them all.
He knows them all. That is significant. And security. Security is bigger for people than I realized it was. But yeah, we've been talking about Hebrews lately, and everything that Hebrews says about how elevated Jesus is above everything else. And for him to just say, I've got this under control. You're going to be okay.
Right.
That's all I need.
Right. So let's take this then to start to put it into a little bit of practical application. So love is in meeting needs, and we're always going to be thinking about acceptance, security, and significance. We want to be looking at ourselves and our own lives. We want to be thinking about this. And, one of the things that I would always say with this is that the Bible tells us that you need to love your neighbors, you love yourself. I will often tell a mother who is overburdened with childcare responsibilities and things like that it's going to be hard for her to really love her children well if she doesn't love herself well first, because you love others the way you love yourself. Well, Jesus literally says to do that. And so I think about the woman at the well when Jesus met her, and there's a conversation in that whole thing, and he says, someday you're going to worship me in spirit and in truth. And I think that it's really important that we take a moment to think about 4 views of ourself before we go much further with this. Because in relationships, whether it's with other just friends or with spouses, with your children, with extended family, maybe just people you're working with, maybe the relationship that you have with God, maybe even the relationship your personal relationship that you have with yourself. We get ourselves stuck in some places that I don't think we recognize a lot of times. And I think that understanding these 4 views of yourself is really important when it comes to making sense out of what love is meeting needs is going to be in your own life. And so the first place we start is literally the way we see ourselves. And it's just this view that we have of ourselves. And if we're coming out of a broken perspective, like I may be a child of divorce, and I may be an adult child of divorce, and it might have been 35 years ago, but I'm still looking back on that, and I was probably harmed by that. I know some people who have had just terrible dating relationships, dating an abusive person, or dating somebody who's just constantly critical, and it's worn them down and broken them down. Whatever happens to us, we have this view of ourself that is usually got some brokenness in it. And like a lot of us, I'm not handsome enough, I'm not athletic enough, I'm not smart enough, or I am smart, but I'm not these other things maybe. And we've got this view of ourselves, and we try to press it out there. And what we do then with that is we try to go to a place where we want others to see us in a way that's probably different than the way we see ourselves. And so we're kind of doing this thing where we see ourselves in a broken way, and we want others to see us differently than than
not broken.
Yeah, and so we keep some secrets, or we're even just like sometimes dishonest with others, but a lot of times it's just dishonest with ourselves. And so we want people to see us that way. And that's already two views now of who we are. There's this thing that's like, this is what I want the world to see about me. But then there's this other thing where it's like, they're actually seeing me, and it's not the same person. It's two different people. And so the problem is there's a third view. It's the way we want them to see us is great, but now it's the way that they're actually seeing us. And sometimes they're seeing us as like super desperate. So you got an example here is, I see myself as kind of maybe not as noticed as other people are, as a little bit insignificant. And so what I'm going to do is just talk. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to tell people all my stories. I'm going to tell people what I did. I'm going to tell people how I succeeded in places they've never seen me succeed. And I'm going to do that.
And you get noticed.
Yeah, because I want them to see me that way. But what they actually see is a person who talks a lot. You know what I mean? And you don't. It's like you're not impressing them near as much as you thought. You're just talking a lot.
Man, he really talks about himself a lot.
Exactly. And so that's sort of what happens. But then there's this new thing that we need to get to, and it goes back to the idea that our needs are perfectly met in Jesus, and that's the way that Jesus sees us. And so what we want to do is actually get to the point where we bring all of these things into one. If I could truly see myself the way that Jesus sees me, then my view of myself is actually going to be that. And if I'm actually seeing myself the way that Jesus sees me, and I'm thinking that that's good, then that's also what I want others to see. And it's also what maybe they'll actually see. And you can almost see all of those things coming together into one actual view of yourself that has integrity to it. And so when Jesus says that we'll eventually worship in spirit and truth, I think that this is what that's about. I think that if we're pretending when we come to church that because I don't feel my security needs have been adequately met, and I'm pretending to be something that I'm not, and other people are seeing me pretend, and they're looking at me and recognizing that, and the thing that Jesus sees is out of the picture, I think that we're not worshiping in spirit and truth. We're never getting anywhere towards the center of what it's supposed to be. But I think there's integrity here if we can do this. And again, so this whole thing is about love is meeting needs. We need to get to the place where we can recognize that legitimate needs that we have are legitimately met in Jesus. And when we can kind of find out what those things are and connect with those, then all of this stuff sort of comes together. You have any insight on that?
I like all that.
Okay, so love is meeting needs. We've talked about this quite a bit then up to this point. Security, significance, acceptance. And what we want to get to then is some questions for applying the concept in our lives. And so one of the first things that I would say is this. I'm Blythe, I missed this one. So let's make a distinction. Needs are not wants. I think when we start talking about this at the first with a lot of different people, that that love is meeting needs. A lot of times people hear me say that means giving people what they want. And so if I'm going to love my children,
but you could meet someone else's need in an illegitimate way.
Exactly.
Too, right?
Exactly. And that's a really good way to put this. Because they want something that they think they need, but they don't really need it. And that's
right.
And I mean, there's a million examples for that. A little 5-year-old thinks he needs cookies before he goes to bed.
Right.
He doesn't need cookies. He may need a hug, but he doesn't need cookies. And so we don't just give people what they want and feel like we're meeting their needs. There are some people who are incredibly broken, and because of their brokenness and their own perhaps insignificance or insecurity, a lot of times they will just power other people into like force them into giving them what they want, and you just feel trapped. But that's not what this is about.
If you loved me, you would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's literally put that way a lot of times. And the thing that they're asking the other person to do is so far from what love should be about. And it's almost like, if you love me, you would do this. And it's like, if you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to do that. But people, so needs are not wants. And we really want to know that and be really careful about that. So that's a good distinction to make before we go any further. So there's some questions for applying this whole thing in your life. And the first one is to ask yourself the question, how am I broken? You look at your own life and you think about acceptance, significance, and security. And you can look and say, probably one of these, I am just more broken than any other area. And what you'll recognize is that the area that you're the most broken in is sort of the way that you want to be loved. And so now if I'm in a relationship with my wife or with a friend and something like that, and I'm thinking that there's something in the relationship that it feels just a little wavy, and I need to love them or something, it's not going to be good. And my first choice is, well, since security is my thing, that's how I'm going to love them. I'm going to meet their security needs. And meanwhile, they're just fine. And security, their thing is acceptance. And so, how am I broken? I need to know that, because it's good information for me when I start thinking about how am I going to meet needs in another person's life. And so I need to be able to separate it out. Am I just doing my thing, or am I actually looking to see where they are? And so, how am I broken? And then that's the next part, is how is my husband or wife or child or friend or coworker, how are they broken? So now I'm starting to get a lot of factors in here, but in the middle of a broken relationship, in like marriage counseling, for instance, it's crazy by the time people come to me for marriage counseling. They probably needed to be somewhere for marriage counseling 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And by the time they get to me, it's really, really crazy. And this is part of what it is to sort that out, though. She needs to look at him and go, how is he broken? And you need to look in his life, and you need to realize, oh my gosh, he was, when he was little, he was a product of divorce, and then his parents both remarried and they both divorced again. Of course he doesn't trust husbands and wives, and so I need to know that, because probably the way he's hurting me is by doing wrong things to meet that need in his life. Right? And so I need to know about him. I need to know about myself. And then I need to be able to maybe even make a note on paper and write this down and say, this is where I'm broken. This is where he's broken. It's incredibly difficult for me to meet his need there, because I'm broken in the same way, maybe. But that's the work I have to do. And so we need to know about ourselves, and we need to ask about the other person. And then I think it's worth thinking about, how have my wrong attempts to meet these needs in my life caused disharmony in my integrity and my relationships? I literally want to examine myself and say, because relationships breaking, and you know what we all do when our relationships are falling apart? It's never our fault, right? If people just understood what was going on here, I wouldn't break
They'd
relationships.
Be on my side.
Yeah, I wouldn't. And you know how often have you ever had people come to you and just think that you're going to totally agree with them when they start explaining the other person's point of view, and you're like, you're a moron. What, can you not see what you're doing here? But the truth, we all think that it's the other person's fault. So I need to look in my life and think, I have done sinful things. I have tried to meet legitimate needs in my life, but they're not right ways. They're not right things. right? So we want to we want to examine that part of our lives, and then I think we want to look at how do I respond to other people's wrong attempts to meet these needs in their lives, and this is where I think grace sort of comes in. I'm going to give the other person a chance to for me to understand how their hurt and brokenness has caused them to behave the way that they're going to behave. So I think that probably starting with these things is a really good idea. So Zach, so when you look at this, do you, love is meeting needs. You're all okay with that. Broken relationships, difficult people in your life. How do you start to put this stuff into practice? And
so a story that I was thinking about, and it was never a broken relationship, as far as we know at least. But I think a really significant part of being able to actually apply this into your life is David and Jonathan.
mm-hmm.
And I like Jonathan for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is something that's sort of overlooked, I think, in their relationship out of 1 Samuel, is that he was, for all intents and purposes, except for what God had picked, he was the heir to the throne.
Mm.
Jonathan was supposed to be the next king. Like, that's the way it worked. It was hierarchical, and his dad was the king, and when Saul was gone, it was going to be Jonathan. But David comes to Jonathan. Like, he'd had his episode with the Philistines up on the mountain, and David had already done his thing with Goliath. And so, like, they had sort of this kindred heart thing going on with amazing victories in battle. But David comes to him and says, look, I think your dad's trying to kill me. Something's going on here. And Jonathan's response to that is to sacrifice. He knew that David was supposed to be king, not him. And he sacrificed his right to fight for it to meet David's need at that point. And he had to protect David from his own dad. And there's the friendship and the whole story that goes on there that's amazing. But it's a great picture of a good relationship between friends that works. And it's based on sacrificing for each other. Like, there's something about you that you've got to give away in order to do it well.
Somewhere in Jonathan's life, I think he probably understood that these things were going to come back to him in a right way. He would have, I think Jonathan, if I know the story well enough, knew that even though he was the rightful heir because his father was king, I think Jonathan knew that God didn't want his father to be king.
Yeah.
He wanted David to be king.
He knew David was supposed to be king.
And so he could have maintained his significance in a wrong way.
And there's other people later on that did.
Yeah, by harming David.
Mm-hmm.
Or he could have said, hey, you know what? I am best friend to the rightful king. And he could take significance out of that. I mean, I'm reading into the story a little bit there, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised from what we know about Jonathan that he actually took more pleasure in something happening for the right reason than for the wrong reason. And so I think he could get a significance from there. This stuff is this is 5 hours of counseling in almost any marriage situation that I'm dealing with, and it's hard to do because on one hand it's like we can often see how I'm broken and how you're broken, and we can talk about it pretty well for an hour. But then we go home for the week and we deal with each other again. And it's as bad as it ever was. It takes a lot of work to do this. But I think that we want to really have a way to apply this. And what the application, I'll give you kind of at the end, but there's another thing to remember before we go too far with this. When we talk about love is meeting needs, that is an everyday ongoing obligation that we have to do. And you know what? When relationships and like in marriages start to go bad, we get to a point where we're like, man, I better buy her flowers. Or some guys, I know a guy is like he bought her a car because he'd been making her so mad for so long that he had to buy her a car, a nice car, not a used one. And he goes to that degree, and he's hoping it'll solve the problem. And by the time you're there, you're in a lot of trouble. I think that one of the things that we really want to look at is if we're going to do this, we want to apply the law of the harvest, and what goes on, and what we're doing to meet needs. And because you can only do so much in the first week. In fact, you'll see people when we start talking about this, the secrets are kind of out, and it's like, I know why you're such a jerk now, and I know why I'm such a jerk, and the secrets are out, but we still don't trust each other, and that's when security is a thing. And so we have to apply the law of the harvest here, and it's really important to remember this. The first law of the harvest is you're going to reap what you sow. And I will say, I just read today, it popped up on Facebook, and I thought it was really cool. And I think it's probably because today is election day around here. But it was St. Francis's peace prayer, and all it is Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And then it's like, where others sow this, let me sow that, and it's all about the seeds that you plant. Where others sow hatred, let me sow love, and all of that. And this is what it is: you will reap what you sow. And for years and years, we've been sowing brokenness and sowing discord because we have been trying to find our needs met in wrong ways. And so it ends up looking like selfishness and so many different things. And if you sow selfishness, you're going to reap selfishness. If you sow bitterness, you're going to reap bitterness. If you sow all of the negativity that we ever sow into each other's lives, that's what's going to grow out of it. And it grows. And when I'm talking about a new car or flowers, those are the harvest. And it's like, I'm going to give you the whole thing, and it might even be I'm going to pay $120 and go to counseling with you to try to figure this out. I'm going to spend an hour there, and it's like, when you're at that level, the laws of the harvest aren't really working. But when we start at the beginning and say, you know what I'm going to do? I can only do so much this week. I can only do so much this day. But what I am going to do is I'm going to begin to sow seeds of peace. I'm going to begin to sow seeds of trust, security, acceptance, and significance.
Seeds are small.
Seeds are small. And that's the next law of the harvest. You will reap more than you sow. Right. You sow a handful of seeds, and you will harvest a bushel of crops. So a seed of peace today, a seed of peace tomorrow, a seed of peace, the next day, and you'll reap. And then the third law of the harvest, it kind of goes with this, is it comes later. It takes a while for this stuff to grow, and so that's why you got to keep working on it. I have done some things in counseling where it's literally unfair, and I've talked to people, and this is a secret, so everybody's going to know it now. But I've talked to people in counseling situations that their marriages are just awful, and I've told, a lot of times it's been the wives, but every now and again it's the husband. And I will tell them, look, you need out of this marriage. And in 30 days or 60 days, you're probably going to be at a place where you can get out of this. But I said, you've got kids, you've got a church, you've got family, there's people watching. So do me a favor. You're going to get out of this because he's such a jerk or she's so mean. You're going to get out of this. I need you to do me a favor, and I need you to make it 100% their fault. For the last 30 days or 60 days, whatever it is, I don't want anything coming back that they say it's your fault. And they're like, okay, because they I'm going to get out of this, and their desire to feel secure again or to feel significant again it's like given a little flame of birth, and it's like I'm telling them that they can be out of this, if they just do the right thing for 30 or 60 days. And I go, so what you need to do is try to figure out what their security, significance, or acceptance needs are. Try to meet them without missing anything for the next 30 or 60 days or whatever. And you do that, and in 30 or 60 days, we'll sit down and he will have blown it up, or she'll have blown it up, and everyone in town's going to be able to say the same thing I'm saying. You should get out of this. We all see what's going on. And I've had people call me like 5 days later and go, I know what you're doing. And I'm like, what am I doing?
5 days.
And they're like, I've been meeting their needs for 5 days and they love me again.
Uh-huh.
And I sort of like them better. And I'm like, that's exactly what I'm doing. And I've never had anybody that met needs hard and furious for more than 2 or 3 weeks that didn't start to see a super positive change in their relationship. And so you're thinking, well, what about me? If I just meet their needs, this is the way God takes care of things. We live in a sowing and reaping universe. And if I sow love, what I'm going to reap is love. And so it comes back to us. And a lot of times the other person doesn't hardly even know that they're doing it. They just do it out of desire. Does that make sense? So the thing that we do then to kind of wrap this up is pretty simple. You pray for your broken relationships. You pray for the places where you just haven't felt love. And if this is your husband or your wife, or if it's somebody you haven't talked to for 20 years, if it's a parent, you just pray for your broken relationship. And the prayer is really simple. The prayer is this: Lord, show me a need that I can meet in so-and-so's life. And it's really important here for us to make a little distinction. If I'm talking to a married man about his wife in this situation, the need that God shows him to meet in her life is very different than the need he'll show me to meet in her life. The I is really important there. It's the need that I get to meet in their life. Make sure it's a need and not a want. And what God will probably do, we're so panicky and so disoriented when they're in the chaos of a broken relationship that we will often be like, that can't be what he wants me to do, because I gotta buy her a truck or whatever. I gotta make her happy. I gotta get her flowers. And God might be saying, no, I'm serious. I want you to love her today by saying her name to her 3 times today, and not just saying, I know people that call their wife honey and they're 3 days away from a divorce. Start saying your wife's name to her. One of the stories in my own life, the greatest, it was a life-changing example of love in my own life, was a guy that didn't need to remember my name because he was important and I wasn't. And he remembered my name after 3 months, and he called me out on the campus. He was at the college, and this guy goes, "Hey, Darren," and I was like, "That's Chip. He's the leader of that group that I went to one time 3 months ago." And Chip had no idea, but he was the first person in the world that I know of that didn't have to know my name, that remembered my name. And I felt loved by him. And so you don't know what it's going to be. It's probably not going to be as big as you think it is. It's just, Lord, show me a need that I can meet in their life today. And pray that prayer every day. Pray it for every person that you know. And that's how we learn to love people. Remember the law of the harvest as you go through it. So that's love is meeting needs.